So when it comes to this topic, I feel that it causes a lot of confusion, and I feel that the confusion has been caused by the enemy because when we fall into sin, the enemy wants us to blame God and be like, well, God, why did you tempt me in the first place? Because he wants us, at the end of the day, his mission is to take us away from God. So I feel that, this world and him, he likes to kind of trick us into thinking that God is the one who did it. But it's not. It's literally him. God doesn't tempt us into sin because God doesn't want us to sin. So why would God tempt us to sin? I know there's a whole thing when it comes to trials and stuff, which is true. God will put us through trials, but he doesn't. The trials doesn't tempt us to sin. Now I'm gonna get in to the verse that explains all of it, and it is in the book of James, and it's from chapter 1, verse. I can find it. Verse 14, and it says, "But each one is tempted when he is drawn away by his own." Wait, no, not 14, 13. I skipped like one. Anyway, let no one say when he is tempted, I am tempted by God. For God cannot be tempted by evil, or nor does he himself tempt anyone. But each one is tempted when he is drawn away by his own desires and enticed. Then when desire is conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is full grown, brings forth to death. So to take into account thoroughly that God does not tempt us. It's our flesh. It's our flesh. It's our own desires. And we have to fight our own desires with God's help. But God does not, I repeat, God does not tempt us to sin. It is not God. That is the enemy telling you that it's God that's tempting you to sin. It is him. It's literally him that is tempting you to sin. And he wants us to blame God and to go away from God. That's why this kind of conversation causes all sorts of confusion. It causes all sorts of confusion onto it because he doesn't tempt us to sin. He puts us through trials, and I think the book of Job as well is one of those ones which is like a head spin. But if you look at the book of Job, even when God allowed, the enemy to put him through all that, Job wasn't tempted by sin, but he was distraught. I do recommend you read the book to start off it to kind of get an idea. I did do a video on the book of Job. I will link it down below. But he did put him through the trials, and through what Job was going through, he could have sinned. He was wrestling. He was arguing with his friends. He was at the end like, not arguing with God in such a way, but he couldn't understand what was happening and everything like that. But in what was happening, he could have sinned. But he didn't. He just questioned, which I know you shouldn't question God or his authority and stuff. He questioned God, which, I mean, you could argue that might have been a sin. But at the end of the day, the whole reason why that happened was because, he wanted to prove to the enemy that, even if I take all these things that Job has, he will still stay faithful. So that was kind of a trial, but it wasn't like I'm going to throw sin, I'm going to tempt him with sin and stuff like that. It's just in whatever we're going through, the flesh can be like, oh, okay, I'm going to go back to my old ways or that sort of thing. But God doesn't tempt us to sin. That's not the whole point of the trials. Don't feel that when you've sinned, it's God's fault, because it's not God's fault. At the end of the day, this is another thing that causes some confusion, is we suddenly always blame the enemy for when we sin, which in fairness, it is true in a way, because, the world is full of, it's full of sin, it's full of evil, it's there to kind of, as it says here, it's there to trick us, but yeah, it's the enemy, but at the end of the day as well, it's our flesh, and to help us like kill the flesh and to kill that temptation in the flesh is to go to God and to go to God. Whenever we feel tempted, just go to God, and He will help you. But please, if you do end up falling in sin, you end up slipping, please do not blame God, because it is not God. It is not God. It is the enemy, and the enemy is telling you it is God.